You're listening to the Westminster-Canterbury Tales podcast, creating community to foster joy and well-being. Thanks for listening.
Good day, everybody. This is Ellen Duckworth. I am your sales manager for the marketing department here at Westminster-Canterbury, and I have the great pleasure of being able to host a podcast for the Westminster-Canterbury Tales. Our guest today is someone that I met and was so intrigued by his story and his life. I said, I've got to share this with the residents at Westminster-Canterbury. Mr. Ray Wright, the cool cat, actually is a gentleman who for the last 17 years or so has been either on the radio or operating his own podcast called Classic Artists Today, where he interviews artists from the past. These are people from the 50s, 60s, and 70s who've influenced our lives in so many ways, bringing us such joy with their music. And he discovers what they're doing now and questions about their life. And it has been such a fascinating journey for me to listen to some of his shows. So I wanted to make sure that I shared it with you. His shows have been syndicated and they have actually been played everywhere from the United States to Canada and Europe. So Ray, welcome.
Thanks so much. A pleasure to be here today.
Well, my first question is for you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got involved in these podcasts.
Well, I was born and raised right here in the Hampton Roads area and lived here majority of my life. And since I was a child, was very interested in music. When my parents put me to bed at night, I would sneak the transistor radio under the covers and listen to WGH and WNOR, which were popular, actually AM stations back in the day, and just got to really love the music of the time. And it's just something that's been with me my entire life. And basically how I started my shows were I had got a position down in Northeast North Carolina, a work position down there, and had a lot of free time and was listening to the radio one day and said, I just really don't care a whole lot for the music that's playing now. What happened to these bands that I grew up with? And spent some time researching them and found out a lot of them were still around. They just weren't getting airplay on the radios, and talked to a few friends of mine that were in the radio business and said, well, what do you think if I put together a show, kind of featuring the new music from the classic artist? And we also play some of their several older tunes too, but they loved the idea and got on the radio, and it just grew and grew from there to where we ended up on over 45 times a week on radio stations, in various countries. And that's kind of how everything kicked off.
So what type of musicians do you interview, the genre of music?
Well, we have two shows right now. One of them is called Sitting In with the Cat, and that features rock and pop musicians that have been around and produced albums 20 years or longer. So 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up to just over 2000, we feature those bands. We also produce Sitting In with the Cool Cat, and that particular show is geared towards soul, R&B, contemporary jazz. Some people call it smooth jazz, and blues artists. And in the past, we've even had a country show called Nashville Cat that we hopefully will be able to relaunch here in the not too distant future.
That's fantastic. Now, how do you find your guest? I mean, how willing are they to talk to you?
Well, we find they're fairly willing to. As I mentioned, a lot of these bands are producing new music, but radio just doesn't play their new stuff. They play their big hits from back in the day, but really there's not many radio stations around the country that feature their new music. So when I contact them, and either that's through their management company, through their PR company, or it could even be be through themselves. A lot of them today are just self-managed, and a member of the band kind of handles the business aspect, and I just reach out to them and tell them what I'm doing, and overwhelming majority say yes, we'd love to participate in your show, and we'd love to send you our new music so you can share with our fans and reconnect them to their old memories of yesteryear.
Can you give us an idea, like a list of some of the people that you've interviewed?
Well, we've interviewed for both shows now that are available on demand over 150 bands and musicians. So some of them include bands back from the late 50s, early 60s. The Association, Gary U.S. Bonds, and let's see, the Monkees from back in the day. Interviewed them.
Micky or Dave?
It was Micky.
Oh, I love Micky.
And unfortunately, he's the only one still with us today, and had a chance to do that several years ago. And then again, up to later bands, the Doobie Brothers, was one that I've interviewed various members throughout the years, in association too. And I think we've got a little clip now of Gary U.S. Bonds, and just to give you a flavor of that interview. This is Ray White with Classic Artists Today and Cool Cat, and today we have a gentleman who we have a lot in common with him. He was actually started his career in Norfolk, Virginia, and I was brought into this big old world in Norfolk, Virginia, so we're really pleased to have Gary U.S. Bonds with us here today. Welcome, Gary.
Glad to be here, Ray.
Well, your history is certainly unbelievable throughout the years, and so many highlights throughout your career. But one thing that happened a couple years ago, back in 20, was your latest CD, and the whole concept of that was real unique. Tell us about that project.
Well, it seems like it takes me 20 years to get my stuff together and get an album release, and that's why we named it to Back in 20, because here I am again, back in 20 years, and hopefully it won't be 20 years later that I'll do it. I'll try to make it a little quicker next time.
And when it's first kicked off back with New Orleans and all the great songs you had back in the 60s, here in Norfolk, Virginia, with the Norfolk Sound, how would you describe, in your words, what the Norfolk Sound is and what it was?
Well, it's a fun sound, we kind of stumbled onto it, Daddy and I, and kind of just created something. He's got a unique style of playing sax, of course, as everybody knows. Nobody plays saxophone like Daddy G, and that fit right in with that old loud, strange kick drum and the rest of the sounds that we were trying to get out of a studio that we laughingly referred to as a studio, that Frank Guida built. Just a room with some soundproofing slabs up there, and hopefully it'll come out all right with a 2-track recorder.
And Quarter to Three was certainly one of your biggest hits back then too, but it was really yourself, Daddy G, and a few other local guys, right?
Oh yeah, that was it, Nab Shields and Leonard Box, who is now only one of the last surviving members besides Daddy G of the Church Street 5, and Ed Farley, and Melvin Glover's still around too, the old drummer. He was one of the drummers back then, and Earl Swanson, he's no longer with us. It's all the guys that passed away, unfortunately.
Wow, that's fantastic that you get to speak with them and learn all about them, so that's really wonderful. What were some of your favorite interviews?
Well, some of my favorite ones, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the Doobie Brothers. I've just loved their sound from day one, the harmony, the professionalism within the band members. So they're certainly right up there. Heart is another band. Nancy Wilson and her sister.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, and her sister Ann are just phenomenal. And throughout the years and even to today, putting out great new music. I would say another favorite interview is Toto. Toto was a band that started in the 70s. They backed up. They were studio musicians to start out with, and backed up so many bands, including Michael Jackson and his Thriller album back in the day. And they were certainly one of the best too. And then another one of my favorites was Earth, Wind and Fire. Just a dynamic band. The sound is just marvelous. And if you can't move your feet and get up to dance when you're listening to them, then something's wrong with you.
I know, exactly. So it's so interesting, though, that you get to speak with all of these people. What are some of the questions that you ask them?
Well, basically, I start out most of the interviews talking about their early years, how they got started in the business, who may have been influences to them when they started. Then we kind of move forward to some of their career highlights. They may be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or Soul Hall of Fame, or have won numerous Grammy Awards. And I get them to share a little bit about those days. And then we move into their current activities, their latest music they've produced, upcoming tours, and the like. So the show is very concise, 30-minute format, and we usually touch on those type of things during the interviews.
Was there an interview that you were doing when you got caught off guard? Like, I wasn't expecting this.
Yes, probably Brian Howe, who was the lead singer for Bad Company for about a 8 or 10 year period when Paul Rodgers left and went solo. After the interview, he said, "Ray, I've got something. Would you do for me?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure, Brian. What do you want?" And he goes, "Well, we've got a new member in the band, and what I want you to do is when we go out of the room, can you just start arguing with me?" And I said, "Well, Brian, that's really not my style. I'm a pretty easygoing guy here." And he goes, "Nah, I want to play a joke on him, And finally, he talked me into it. So, and some friends of his I had talked to, because the interview was right after the show. Some of his friends were down from D.C. The show was at the oceanfront here in Virginia Beach. And so we had a great conversation during watching the show and everything with them. So I walked out of the dressing room with Brian, and, we started arguing. And at the same time, his new band member was coming out the next door, the dressing room there. And, he just looked at us and his eyes got really big. And
thought you were about to get into a fight.
Yeah. And after about 10 seconds, he ran back into his dressing room. And then the folks that, again, his friends that came down from D.C., they just couldn't believe what was going on there, too. And then after about a minute, Brian started laughing. We all started laughing. But that was certainly something unexpected. I would have never thought. But looking back on it now was certainly a fun time and something out of the ordinary.
Yeah. I know that most of your interviews today are probably done virtually. Is that correct?
I would say about 30% of them are done virtually, either via Zoom or on telephone. Mm-hmm. I much prefer doing them in person because you get a few minutes to talk to them before and kind of build up a little rapport. And the conversation sometimes seems to go other places too. Mm-hmm. With some of the bands doing the phone interviews, if they have a brand new album out, their PR folks line up about 8 or 10 phone interviews in a day. And if you're one of the ones that are unlucky to be one of the last ones, you can tell they're kind of tired of talking about the same thing in the new album. So I try to do as many as I can personally, and certainly being here in Hampton Roads with all the great music venues, that can keep me pretty busy by itself.
I bet, because I saw that, I guess it was, who was playing last night?
There was Blackstone Cherry.
Blackstone Cherry.
Rock
you were there for that.
Yeah, a rock band.
It was Marshall Tucker.
Oh, yeah, Marshall Tucker
was playing last night.
Yep. I've had them on my show before. And so they haven't really done any new material. I usually wait until they do something new, release a new single, which is more commonplace now than albums. A lot of these bands don't have major record companies. The industry has changed over the years, so a lot of them are just releasing singles now rather than full albums. So,
do any of them talk about the technology and how it's changed music, or do they feel that it's changed music?
Well, absolutely. And it's ironic that you asked that question, because I've interviewed about 500 musicians throughout the last 17 years when I started this show, and in the process of writing a book. And the book is not just going to be, interviews from these folks, but we're going to interject the technology that has taken place, especially the bands that started back in the 60s and to today. And there's been big changes. It used to be recorded on tape and then spliced together for their albums and all. And now everything is digital. Also, in the early days, they had very few sound effects as they recorded the music. And today, it seems like, weekly almost, there's new sound effects that come out, and sampling of little bits of music from the old days that they interject in the new music. So it's, and then record companies, unless you're a major act now, most of the bands and musicians self-produce, or through just a small entity release their new material.
Well, I know that going through 30, 40, 50 years in the music industry, they've got to have some kind of insider advice. What would be some of the more impactful statements that you heard from people that you thought, wow, this is almost like a life lesson or something to remember?
Well, I think the big difference I hear from a major majority of them today is that now they have more control over their music.
Oh, okay.
And how they perform, when they perform, and the type of music they perform. Back in the early days, again, you had the major record companies, the RCAs, the Columbias, the Warner Brothers, and basically their management kind of dictated to them what songs they like and felt should be on the album. But today, the musicians and bands have so much more control, so they get to choose what they want to release and how and when. So that's probably the biggest thing I hear from them today, is a lot more freedom from that standpoint to do what they like, especially at this point in their careers.
Very good. Now, is there someone you haven't interviewed yet that you'd really like to?
Well, I would say either Ringo or Paul McCartney with the Beatles. I've always wanted to interview them, but of course they're so well known, and unless it's a major publication or a major show, just almost impossible to get. And then another one I was thinking about was Cher. Cher has been around for so many years and certainly lived such iconic life. I think she would be one that I would certainly love to get on the show too.
Ray, what's been one of the more surprising stories that you've heard?
Well, there's been quite a few. One is a fellow named Eric Gales, who's more of a blues guitarist, who's has had a reemergence over the last few years. And he was really a child prodigy. Released his first album. He was 16 or 17 years old. That did just great. And then just kind of fell off the charts for decades. And he's recently emerged, but his story that I have on episode 135, on Sitting In with the Cat, is certainly one that's very heartwarming, that he's made the reemergence and really straightened out his life to be able to get back on the charts again. Another one is a saxophonist named Will Donato, and Will is a jazz saxophonist. He's on our Cool Cat show number 120. 2020. But Will had had some serious life-threatening health issues that he's overcome. And just talking with him was such a joy because you could tell how he feels in life. He's got a second chance, and now his comeback. Another one was Chuck Lavelle, and Chuck is the musical director and keyboardist for the Rolling Stones.
Oh.
And the Stones certainly don't tour nowadays all the time, maybe 2 or 3 months a year. But Chuck is from Georgia, and he is a very big environmentalist and has a big tree farm down there. Recently has released a documentary film on his life, but just very, very intriguing, very, very smart guy. But those are three that kind of stand out among many others. And I would say one more was Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. A unique story there real quickly that I was interviewing Al Jardine, his longtime friend and member of the band. And when I was interviewing Al, he kept looking over his shoulder and finally stopped the interview and said, "Hey, Brian." Brian was across the hall at his room and said, "Got a radio guy here. Do you have a couple of minutes to interview him?" And Brian said, "Well, come on in." And Brian gives very, very few interviews. And to have 3 or 4 minutes with him, asked him a few questions, and then he said, "Thank you." When he said thank you, I knew that interview was over. But that was certainly a highlight during my time, too.
So what kind of music or concerts do you go to?
Well, again, I'm very fortunate in when I interview these folks here locally in person that they give me the VIP treatment and get to go backstage and great tickets to the show. But again, I think a wide variety of the music that I have on both my Sitting In With the Cat and Sitting In With the Cool Cat shows. So a wide variety of rock, pop, soul, R&B, contemporary jazz, are basically the musics that I really enjoy and listen to. So overwhelming majority are those genres of music.
Well, I want to thank you for the referral to Bobby Blackhat. I mean, for the Westminster-Canterbury residents and our clients out there, Bobby's going to be playing here for a Blues on the Bay concert in August. So he's one of the better blues musicians from this area. So you do these podcasts when it's virtual from your home, correct?
I do. I produce it in my home. I have a little studio in my home, and I put everything together there. I do the announcing for the Sitting In With the Cat show, and then a great talent out of the Outer Banks, Lisa Davis, who's on the radio down there, and also up in Williamsburg on the Tide radio. She does the voice and hosts our Sitting In With the Cool Cat show. And I do all the interviews for them, but I have a little portable studio that I take for the in-person interviews. Technology's amazing today. It's basically an iPad and a little adapter with a microphone, and I record it on that and then transfer it to my computer and makes everything down from there.
Fantastic. Well, before we close, which I've got a couple of other cuts that we'd like to listen to from Russ or from Keith. Which one do you think we should close out with?
Well, let's go with Keith. Keith was a member of Chicago for many years, and of course they've put out millions and millions of plays of their albums throughout the years. And then Keith has a Virginia connection. He grew up in Richmond and also went to James Madison University. So let's play Keith, who was with Chicago.
All right, so here this is.
This is Ray White with Classic Artist Today, The Cat, and this week we've got Keith Howland of Chicago and also a new band called Button. He's Sitting In With the Cat. How's it going, Keith?
Things are going very well here in the dressing room at the Virginia Beach Amphitheater. You might hear some bass playing in the background. That's Brett Simons, our new man on the bass guitar, who's tearing it up, by the way. Things are good.
Now, hooking up with Chicago, you've been with them, I think, maybe close to 20 years. But how did you get that opportunity? And from the start, was it something they said, come on in the band, we need you? Or was it something that gradually happened?
Well, I'll give you the short story on it. Basically, I had finished up with Rick. Rick wasn't working at the time. It was around 1994. I was in a couple of different original band projects that we were gigging around LA and doing a lot of rehearsing. And we happened to be rehearsing at Third Encore, which is a rehearsal studio in LA that a lot of major acts go to, and Chicago happened to be in doing pre-production for their Night and Day Big Band album. And the drummer who was in the band that I was rehearsing with knew Jason Sheff very well, so Jason popped his head in to say hi, and I met him, and I jokingly said to him, well, if you guys ever need a guitar player, I'm your guy. And he laughed, and he went back to his rehearsal, and I went back to mine. And then fast forward about 3 months later, I got a phone call from a buddy of mine that worked at Third Encore saying that Chicago was auditioning guitar players at the rehearsal studio. And so I threw all my gear in my car and I drove down there, and I sat in the parking lot until I saw Jason walk by, and I got out and went, hey, Jason, you remember me? And, I said, if you guys need a guitar player, and he went, no, I don't remember you. And but I guess I was persistent enough that he jogged his memory enough to recommend that the guys listen to me. And so they did. And 23 plus years later, I'm sitting here at the Virginia Beach Amphitheater.
Wow, that's fantastic. So I don't want to take up too much more time, but how can we listen to you? What are the areas? What's the name of the podcast link? Okay.
Probably the best way is you can go to our website, which we're currently updating, but that is www.classicartist with a S on it today.com, and there it'll say click here to listen to the episodes. So that's the rock and pop one. And then for our soul, R&B, and jazz and blues show, Sitting In With the Cool Cat, you can go to www.coolcat, and that's with 3 O's, not 2.com. And again, within the first paragraph, it'll say click here, and that'll get you in. Also, we're on a lot of the streaming services, the Amazon, and if you listen to various music on streaming formats, we're on quite a few of those. And of course, you can Google both shows too, and it'll come up, and you can get to it that way also.
Well, our time has come to an end, and I just love when I'm out and about in the community and I meet such interesting characters like Ray. Just know if you ever need a guest to go with you to the backstage of any of these shows, I'm available. But thank you so much for taking your time to come out here, and I hope that all the residents and people that are listening to this podcast take a moment to go and check out www.coolcat.com and www.classicartistwithanstoday.com. Thank you so much, Ray. We appreciate your time.
You're certainly welcome. It's been fun to spend time with you here.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Westminster-Canterbury Tales podcast. Thank you for listening.